combustion analysis, you subject this thing to combustion. So all the carbons are going to be carbon dioxide, hydrogen is going to be converted to the water. Then the halogens, normally they are converted to the corresponding silver halide, sulfur to sulfur dioxide. There are different techniques to determine. So what you do ultimately, you do a quantitative combustion of the compound so that you can have a very good estimation of the corresponding gases. You can do by the generally nowadays it is done by gas chromatography. Otherwise, it has to be absorbed. Like if you water, then water can be absorbed by the calcium chloride, and then you check the weight before absorption of the water vapor and after absorption, and by difference you can get how much amount of water has been generated, and you know how much milligram of the compounds you had it, right? When you will be coming, you don't know, the lab might have been changed. So opposite to the laboratory, there was a CHN analyzer in the organic chemistry department in the ground floor. I do not know whether they have changed this thing. So this is one of the very important ways. So then what, probably in the class 2 we have learned that when the percentage composition of the elements are given, from that you can determine an empirical formula, right? And once you get the empirical formula, and if you know the molecular formula, that this vapor density, then molecular quantity, then you can find out what is the molecular formula. So this is the routine practice for that. It is not just for the sake of it has been taught to you in your class 2. I hope that it has been taught to you in class 2. It was in the syllabus when we were a school student for that. So that is exactly the way actually unknown compounds, organic compounds of a structure was determined. Then you have the molecular formula. Then you try to find out what are the various other structural feature present, means it is going to be functional group. In this case, an unsaturation is also considered a functional group, and that is the reason I have discussed it earlier, that a functionality level and unsaturation level, because when we have an unsaturation carbon, then the way the functionality level is calculated, it becomes equal to 0. Means you cannot carry out a chemical reaction on that particular carbon as per the F value is concerned. But we know that we can carry out a reaction at an unsaturated carbon, which is a hydrogenation reaction or is a bromination reaction. So you can subject it to bromination. Now bromination we'll do subsequently, we'll understand when we go for the functional group analysis. Then bromine can be added to a unsaturation. It might be a olefinic unsaturation or it might be a acetylenic unsaturation also. But apart from a molecule being a distinctly olefinic unsaturation compound or a acetylenic unsaturation compound, there are certain functional groups which consumes bromine to convert into a chemical reaction under other type of chemical reactions. So that can be distinguished through a different technique. So this can be done in a quantitative way. How much amount of bromine has been consumed, how much amount of hydrogen gas has been consumed, and how much amount of material was subjected to bromination reaction or hydrogenation reaction. Accordingly, you can quantify how many numbers of double bonds are present. And there is another parameter which is taken into consideration here called double bond equivalent, DBE. So I hope that you have been told what is called DBE earlier. Do you know what is called double bond equivalent?
Yes, sir. There is a formula for one, two.
Right. That means I will not go for that. I just only wanted to know whether you are acquainted with that.
Yes.
Right. In that case, what will happen that if a compound has a ring, like for example, if you take benzene DB is going to be 4 because 1 ring system and 3 double bond. So DB also will come into the picture, but the bromination and hydrogenation quantification will distinguish you whether those are due to the hydrogenable or brominable double bond, or those are going to be aromatic compound or a simple ring system. Then comes for the functional group identification. Double bond is also functional group, but since it requires a specific type of reaction, that's why I have taken it as separately it gives another connotation also. Then, but once we determine the functional group means we'll show what are the common functional group in the next. Then, the molecules is subjected to a degradation, which is called chemical degradation. Chemical degradation means that you can forcefully treat with under harsh reaction conditions so that it will undergo a different type of bond cleavages, and that sometimes helps you to identify also to the presence of a certain structural point. Like, is there any methyl group, and how many methyl groups are attached to a carbon atom? This is called C-methyl group estimation and determination. There are two different terminology. When you call determination and identification, it is merely qualitative idea. When you call estimation, it gives a quantitative. So how many methyl groups are attached to a carbon atom? So this was done in 1933 called Kuhn-Roth C-methylation reaction. Details will not go. So when we come to the organic reactions, probably details. But generally, what was discussed earlier, that if you take an organic compound and subject it to an oxidation reaction, very harsh condition, normally it is going to be chromic acid oxidation reaction at normally high temperature. Normally chromic acid is used for an oxidizing agent for a secondary alcohol or even primary alcohol also. Primary alcohol, there are a lot of other oxidizing agents, secondary alcohol to a ketone. Like this is called chromic acid. Sometimes it is called Jones oxidizing agent also. You take potassium dicarbonate and dilute sulfuric acid, you will get the corresponding concentrated sulfuric acid with the chromic acid. But later on, it was found out that there might be some. So what was told by Kuhn-Roth, that any methyl group, when it is attached to a carbon, when it is subjected to a harsh oxidation, then per methyl group you are going to generate 1 mole of acetic acid. But later on, it was found out that it cannot differentiate between whether a methyl group is attached to a tertiary carbon or there is a secondary methyl group or there is a tertiary. Like it might be CMe, CMe whole 2 and CMe whole 3. So initially it was proposed that all these things are going to generate 1 mole of acetic acid per mole of the substrate, but later on there was found out that it will generate, it might not be the final oxidation, it might give an acetone derivative. So that acetic acid you are not going to generate. So, but early stage, these were applicable actually for the long chain fatty acid, which do not have a much branching rather than single branching. So that was the reason early stage it was very much possible to do it. But then later on, now we'll see that what is the other ways in the advanced way to determine all those structures. Then there might be a O-methyl group. The methyl group which is attached to an oxygen atom. So this is called O-methyl group estimation. This is called Jezzel method. Like it was introduced by Jezzel in 1886, and you will see that it adopts a nucleophilic substitution reaction. Maybe I have already told you. So what is the principle behind that? Now, if you have a OMe, generally this OMe is attached to a carbon atom, and that carbon atom is a non-functionalized carbon atom. Non-functionalized means it is not attached to a carbonyl group for that. So OMe, you can do it, but it was not used for the primarily. It was a methoxy group attached to an aromatic moiety. So what you do, if you can treat this with a hydrochloric acid, then I- is going to undergo a nucleophilic substitution reaction. Then it is going to, we have discussed that chemistry other day, that when you have a aryl methyl group, then you can make it a dialkyl ether when you are treating with a OMe. So in general, any nucleophile can attack a methyl group of a OMe moiety, so that if OMe is attached to a phenol, it is going to be a phenolic is going to be the very good living group, and then you get the methyl attached to the nucleophile. Now here the nucleophile is taken such a nucleophile so that the product we will generate, we can quantitatively estimate the product. So hydrochloric acid was used because I- is going to undergo nucleophilic attack with the Ame group to generate methyl iodide. which is actually a byproduct, but this byproduct now is estimated for the content of the iodide by treatment with the silver nitrate solution. So what you are going to do, you are going to actually quantitatively determine the OMe group. You have been taught NMR, proton NMR. Yes or no? Anybody? 1H NMR spectroscopy has been taught to you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So what we'll do, say, as you see that partly we have a proton NMR carbon 13 also. So I'll interact with you so that I'll come to know to what extent the fundamentals you know, and whatever I feel that this fundamental is necessary to introduce to, I'll talk about. Now, say that OMe group, there might be ester OMe like methyl benzoate, right? Or methyl acetate, CH3CO2Me. Or it might be anisole also, like when OMe is attached to a aromatic ring. So is it possible to take, how do you distinguish whether this OMe is attached to an ester, is the ester OMe group, or this is OMe group is a aryl oxy, like aryl OMe group. Is it possible to use NMR spectroscopy to distinguish between whether the OMe group is ester OMe group or ether OMe group?
Yes, sir.
So how do you do that? What is the chemical shift value if it is an ester and if it is attached to the aromatic ring? Which one will be higher delta value? The ester one or aromatic one?
So the aromatic one.
And what is the tentative range? What is the tentative range for the aromatic OMe? If it is ester, right? If OMe is an ester, very rarely it will cross a 3.7. Generally come 3.5, 3.65, and etc. And if it is attached to an aromatic ring, then it goes close to 4. Generally it comes 3.8, 3.79, and etc. Similarly, when a methyl group is attached to a saturated carbon, methyl group can be attached to a olefinic carbon in sp2 carbon. This sp2 carbon can be olefinic carbon, and the sp2 carbon can be a carbonyl carbon also. So how proton NMR can be used to distinguish between methyl groups? Methyl is attached to an sp3 carbon. Methyl is attached to an sp2 carbon, but this sp2 carbon is a part of olefin. And third is methyl group is attached to sp2 carbon, but this sp2 carbon is a part of a carbonyl group. Simple example.
For the carbonyl group, shift will be higher, most higher, and for the sp3 it will be lowest, and for the olefin group it will be near to.
Right, so fine. So now point is that when we are going to utilize these techniques for the purpose of identification, there are a certain group frequency you should keep it in mind. So now if I ask you that what is the distinct position, that plus minus point delta might be fine. So your answer is correct. But then if I ask you that what is the tentative range of the COCH3, CO means carbonyl group, then olefinic CH3, and least delta value is going to be when it attached to the sp3 carbon. So tentative range,
Sir, for carbonyl group, it should be near 7.
No. Why it should be 7? I'm not talking about vinyl. I'm talking about methyl. Methyl attached like acetone. Acetone COCH3. So where this methyl signal will come in the proton NMR of acetone, or maybe benzophenone, PHCOCH3. So when it is attached to a carbonyl group, it generally comes above 2, 2.1, 2.0, and etc. It will come above 2. If it is attached to a double bond, it always becomes less than 2, 1.5 to close to 2. And when it is attached to saturated carbon, it hardly go beyond 1, maximum 1.01 and 1. So generally it comes 0.9, 0.8, so less than 1, right? Similarly, N-methyl group also, you see that in the early stage, these techniques were not there. So that's why chemical degradation method, and all of them use various kinds of chemical reactions, which you are going to discuss further. That is the reason why you need to know chemical reaction. Number one, in today's context, with the help of a chemical reaction, you build a structure. In earlier days, the chemical reactions were also being discovered. So it was both the purpose for the identification as well as for the using the chemical reaction for the purpose of construction. So then that means methyl group can be present in various chemical environment. It might be attached to carbon, it might be attached to oxygen, and it might be attached to N-methyl also. So it is not only identification, but at the same time quantification also was done by Hartwig-Meyer. So broadly 2 methods. Oldest method was that if you take, and it was particularly useful for the identification of the structure of alkaloids, right? Alkaloids means the natural products, organic containing natural products, which are basic in nature, like sodium hydroxide alkali. So these are called alkaloids because these are called alkali-like, means that physical property of alkali, the similar kind of physical property these substances were showing, though they were non-inorganic in nature, means they were organic in nature. So that's why the name alkaloid came. So alkaloids, most of them which are physiologically active or biologically active, invariably they have an N-methyl. Very rarely you'll find out the alkaloid natural product which is biologically active, it do not have a N-methyl group. So called Hartwig-Meyer methods. Oldest method was there that if you heat or distill the compounds in a soda lime, then it is going to liberate methylamine. That N-methyl component is going to liberate the methylamine. Methylamine can be trapped, and they can be trapped by making a methyl ammonium chloride, and this can be estimated also. So later on it was found out the same chemistry which you are using for the, because that become a little bit much less harsh condition, because here you have to soda lime is a highly basic material and you have to heat it maybe under sealed tube at 200 degrees, 30 degrees centigrade. Compared to that, this chemical reaction in which you are doing a nucleophilic substitution reaction, the same reaction can be extended to N-methyl also. Only thing is that it's subjected to a further methylation reaction called Hofmann exhaustive methylation reaction. We'll discuss that one when we come for the elimination reaction. And then when N become positive, then this methyl group is attached to the nitrogen center, they become much electrophilic in nature. So same chemistry, HI can be treated, and then you are again generating methyl iodide. That will depend upon how many methyl groups are there. That many amount of methyl iodide is going to be generated. This methyl iodide will be trapped and will be treated with a silver nitrate solution under suitable chemical transformation, so that you can generate the silver iodide and you can quantify the iodide. So this is how N-methyl group estimation. These are very popularly known name reactions: C-methyl, O-methyl, and N-methyl group estimation, particularly for the natural product scientist. Then it might be alkaloids, it might be protein peptides also. In the early days, you have to estimate nitrogen also. So this is called Gelder's method of nitrogen. So here also what was done, that it was subjected to a complete degradation reaction. And normally it was done by oxidation, chemical oxidation, generally by a sulfuric acid, so that it will be converted to ultimately. So when any organic compounds we are subjected to very high temperature under oxidation condition, they tend to convert to the corresponding element, like carbon become carbon, but then since it is an oxidizing condition, it will undergo oxidation further and carbon will become carbon dioxide. Similarly, initially nitrogen will be converted to ammonia, and then since sulfuric acid is taken, so it is going to ammonium sulfate, and ammonium sulfate is subjected to a quantitative estimation by using a sulfuric acid acid-based titration method. On that basis, you get some smaller fragment like N-methyl group, how much amount of nitrogen is present there. Then what is done? Again, by chemical degradation method, suppose there is an ester moiety. So ester moiety means it is a two molecule, or amide, it is a two molecules, amine molecules. And similarly, there might be some other. If suppose there is a interconnecting double bond, the double bond can be subjected to oxidative decay, we know ozonolysis, etc. So that it can be two different portions. In this way, they are subjected to a further chemical degradation in such a way, the large molecule can become a small fragment. Then what one can do, that particular fragment, whether that is the fragment is coming from the large molecule or not, you have an apprehension of the small fragment. The smaller fragment might be either available from the natural source, already some small natural product, or it might be very easy to synthesize, whatever the chemistry were known at the time. And that gives you a little bit idea that what is the structure. Then what you do, all the small fragments you try to stitch together, whatever is called a connection approach, the first lecture which I showed you, but that is in a true sense is a disconnection approach. But here, all the small fragments, you just told that fine, if you suppose there is a carbohydrate molecule over there, so you do the hydrolysis of the carbohydrate. Then later on, you try to stitch the non-carbohydrate part and carbohydrate part and see whether it is doing or not. Finally, with this thing, you will get an idea. This is going to be the structure of the compound. And finally, you have to prove all those things by a total synthesis. So you do the total synthesis, and that is the reason that why in the early stage it was very, very difficult to make a complex synthesis. So once you have the total synthesis, then you have all this degradation method or the physical methods of the information. Now you have the compound you have synthesized, and you see that the synthetic compound, and if the compound is already available from natural sources, whether they are matching or not. So I have told you mixed melting point. There is another very authentic, but very trivial or very simple way to make a decision whether two compounds are thus identical or not. So which techniques other than melting point, right? Melting point, there is a limitation that compound has to be solid, but the compound may not be the solid, right? So how you can determine that whether two compounds, presumably supposed to be the same compound but obtained from different sources, maybe two different groups have synthesized, or maybe one group have isolated from the natural product, another group have synthesized from the synthetic laboratory, but you have to tell that these are the same compounds or identical compounds. How do you do that? Is it possible? Non-chemical method, non-chemical means non-chemical degradation method. Physical methods of analysis without taking melting point. UV, NMR, IR, mass, any one of them?
Sir, IR.
Yes, your answer is correct, but you have to be confident, right?
Yes, sir.
But explain, karo. Have you heard about something called fingerprint region in the IR? Yes or no?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So this is the thing I want to know for that. I will not repeat whatever you have told, but what I'll do, I'll go quickly, and so that whatever the gap you have will learn. Now I tell you the philosophy, right? See that any topics, particularly organic chemistry, But I'm telling this, I'm taking organic chemistry only an example. It doesn't mean that on organic chemistry is toughest I'm telling and other things are very easy. I'm not telling that, right? So it will be very difficult for anybody to claim that I have become really master of organic chemistry. आपको तो master degree देता है, but none of us really become a master of any subject. Forget about doctor, philosopher, right? PhD called philosopher. Forget about philosophy. We still do not qualify to become really a master of any subject where we will be getting the degree, right? Master means that you know everything about that. So that is actually the designation of the degree. That is the reason. But anyway, that's the matter. So now why now is such a diverse subject, all subject, particularly organic chemistry, and so much evolving also. It will be very difficult. But that's the fact. So now, how do you try to go close to as much as possible to have a mastery over the subject? One is reading the textbook. Right. Now, how many textbooks there are? Like I have told you, 3 textbooks I have told you. Mainly, like I told, Jerry Mark Pado, I.L. Finard Pado, Morrison Boyd, I do not know if I told or not. Morrison Boyd is also a very good standard textbook. Then, Carey Sandberg, Pattern, but there may be many other textbooks. So, why you need to read all the textbooks? The reason is very simple. Like, when these textbooks are written, they are written by a certain individuals. So, every individual has a biasness or limitation. So when somebody is writing a textbook, then probably his or her focus is certain area or bias is certain area, or maybe in-depth understanding is very good in a particular area. Some area probably is not confident or whatever the reason. So that aspect is not being reflected properly. But moment, same topic, same chapter, you are reading from books written by different authors, then it is expected that you are going to get a comprehensive knowledge for that. The same thing is applicable for your spectroscopic books also. So many books are there. Silverstein Bachelor is there. In our time, Silverstein Bachelor is the only thing. Then you have a Pavia's book, then William Kemp's book. So many books are there. William Kemp was not there when we were learning for that. We have only John Dyer, Chota Sir, Das initially, AAA publication. What will happen now? The same topics, you read it. Maybe you make one particular book, which is a standard book as your textbook, and you cannot purchase all the books for that one, right? Then other books you go to the library, it will be good if you can have your own textbook for that, right? But make a standard textbook, like William Kemp is expected to be a very comprehensive or very standard in all the techniques. Pavia also the same thing. And then you read any other book. I forgot to name, there are many other books for that. So what will happen, it will give a comprehensive treatment. In the same context also, that whenever a teacher is teaching you for that, he or she has a little bit things, and actually when other teacher might have a certain things, in that way, all those missing link, I'll do it. So yes, coming back to this, IR called fingerprint. Why it is called fingerprint region? Why it is called fingerprint? Now, 2 individuals, like when even till today also, certain documents, in certain sector, even in the government sector also, preference to your signature, your thumb impression is more authentic. Like when you'll be retiring, like when I retire, I had to give impression of all my 10 fingers, even your Aadhaar card, right? You have a fingerprint over there, not your signature. Aadhaar card I have not given much info for your signature, although they have taken for that. The reason is very simple, that very rarely the thumb impression of 2 individuals is going to be identical. So to find out whether these 2 person is the same person or not, identical or not, so fingerprint is the only way, authentic way to authenticate 2 individuals. Similar concept was done. So I'll show you what is fingerprint. Fingerprint means if you are getting 2 compounds which are supposed to be identical compound, then if you take an IR of these 2 compounds, like in case of compounds, we have enough reason to have a compound number 1. The same compound you are making again and again for that. So how do we ensure that you are getting the same compound? Because if every time you are doing the reaction may not go 100% completion. So there might be possibility, there might be side products there might be impurity also there. So easiest way is that moment you, whatever the best possible, you think that you have purified the compound, you have done it, and then record the IR of the compound on the same chart paper, but on a different ink. And if these two compounds are the same compound, they must match peak by peak. But there is a particular region only we concentrate. Generally, in the functional group region, they are very much prone to get perturbed without being chemically changed. Now, suppose there is a moisture is there, right? Now, I have been taught to you. So you have a carbonyl compound, right? And if the carbonyl compound is not pure in the context of moisture, are you supposed to get the same IR stretching frequency of the carbonyl compound when you are taking a little bit moisture content vis-a-vis a completely dry compound? Yes or no? Does it matter whether you get a solid which is a completely dry anhydrous solid and a solid having some kind of moisture over there, and the solid is supposed to give a higher stretching frequency due to the presence of a carbonyl group? Should there be a difference in the carbonyl stretching frequency when it is a completely anhydrous, means there is no moisture is present there, and other cases there might be some moisture? Quickly answer for yes or no. If no, then I'll go ahead. No answer. Say it will change. So then I'll show you why it will change. But see that when having a moisture there is no chemical transformation is taking place. Right? There is no chemical transformation taking place. So similarly, so what happens? That means that functional group region, they might vary little bit, but there is some other region which is normally less than 1600 to up to 1700. Generally, it is considered 1200 to 1700. This region, the molecule, if the compound is the same molecule, it must match peak by peak, because this is the region you generally get the bending vibration, a lot of bending vibration. And it is very difficult to interpret the IR spectra peak by peak because there is no correlation over there. You can, certain peaks we can find out that what kind of bending vibrations are there, but moment there is a little bit change, then the bending frequency changes. So this region is very much a representation of the actual chemical constitution of the molecule. So that is the reason this range, 1200 to 700 range, this range is called fingerprint range. So if the two compounds are supposed to be pure, but they are coming from different sources, whether they are same compound or not, in this way to determine that, this is called fingerprint, IR finger. In general, entire IR is called fingerprint, but to make fingerprint is actually this one, and the terminology has come from the fingerprint region. Right, so once you get the compounds, total, you have synthesized the compound chemically, but you know it might be multi-step synthesis. There always remains a possibility in one or other step. The reaction, you are expecting the reaction should go, but the reaction has not come. It is a separate compound. You might be ending up getting a completely different compound because of the side product. So that is the reason you have to ensure that the compound which you have obtained from by making a total synthesis, means right from A to Z, step 1 to step 2, right? You have done it. And that it is the same compound you have to do by mixed melting point. It's a solid, or you can do the IR. It's a very easiest way and non-controversial way. You do not have to depend for anything. And of course, then you have all the other one, right? Now, so then what you do when you do the functional group? So molecule can be divided into two categories. Either it belongs to hydrocarbon. It might be includes not only paraffin. It might include unsaturated and polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons also. And then functional groups. So these are the varieties of functional groups. Like alkyl halides are also called functional because you can carry out a reaction. Then hydroxyl might be alcohol. Moment alcohol might be primary, secondary, tertiary. It can be phenol. Then amines, it might be aliphatic amine, primary, secondary, tertiary. Aromatic amine also primary, secondary. Carbonyl compounds in general. So carbonyl compounds, like having a general formula, R or AR. R stands for alkyl, AR stands for aryl. C double bond of carbon. Then depending upon Y, it can go in Y equal to O, it will be carboxylic acids, aliphatic and aromatic carboxylic acid. When alkoxy OR, R is, that means R is going to be the alkyl group, then we have esters, aryl or alkyl carboxylic ester. When Y equal to hydrogen, called aldehydes, and when Y equal to any alkyl group, primary, secondary, tertiary, whatever the alkyl, whatever be the carbon chain, etc., it becomes a ketone, right? Again, I ask you a question for that, right? How do you distinguish between, not chemically, I am talking about spectroscopically, because bits and pieces in your syllabus, it has been mentioned IR stretching, and then UV and etc. UV, I'll tell you for that, and NMR. So I'll see that to what extent I can do, because full-fledged NMR, so I cannot, we may not have a scope for that one, but whatever the bare minimum will do that. So let's see that how you are going to distinguish between aldehyde and ketone carbonyl. Not chemical method, that's what we are going to do in the practical, how we can distinguish aldehyde and ketone carbonyl. But is it possible by other physical methods, one can distinguish between aldehyde and ketone carbonyl? Any of the spectroscopic techniques, spectrometric technique? Yes or no?
Sir, NMR.
Qualify, justify karo. Suppose I tell you benzaldehyde, PHCOHO means PHCO hydrogen, and acetophenone, PHCO methyl group. Now you tell me that how NMR is going to distinguish between them. What is the characteristic peak you are going to get it?
Sir, can you again please repeat the compounds?
Say it again.
Sir, what are the compounds? Can you please repeat it?
Benzaldehyde and acetophenone. Benzaldehyde means PHCOH, right? PHCO are Y equal to H, and acetophenone means AR equal to PH, C double bond O, and Y equal to methyl. So one is aldehyde and one is a ketone. So hydrogen versus methyl. Anybody else from the audience? Right. We discussed earlier COCH3, right? When there is CH3, it will come close to 2. And when this Y hydrogen is attached to a sp2, and which is going to be carbonyl group, when it is attached to an olefin, it not hardly crosses 6.5. Sometimes if it is a highly conjugated, it can go to 7. And when it is attached to a carbonyl group, it goes beyond 8, generally 9, 10 very rarely goes for that. So looking at this one, so NMR can provide. But can you use IR to distinguish between aldehyde and ketone? A very easy way you can distinguish between aldehyde and ketone if you take IR. Right, probably you have not discussed that. So that I want to know so that I'll quickly go for that because this part. Now, so in today's context, qualitative, now we are doing a functional group analysis. From the entire molecule, we have come to the only functional group which will be part of the practical, and our objective is only we are going to concentrate, so far the syllabus is concerned, is the qualitative organic functional group analysis, but the purpose is actually ultimately by using this knowledge, you are going to ultimately establish the complete structure of the molecule. And this is the part of the information. And this is in your syllabus, so now we are going to restrict, we are going to discuss this one. Again, here also, chemical methods, which we are going to do in the laboratory, and physical methods of analysis, which is called spectrometric method or spectroscopic method. Like these are the 4 techniques for that. Mass spectrometry, I'll see that to what extent we can do. But it will be better to have a complete treatment. I understand that UV and IR has been, and to some extent proton NMR also has been, but as you see that angle of that. So what we'll do, whatever the essential requirement is required, we'll try to discuss with you, right? Now, coming back to UV. So generally when you take UV, we always try to correlate among all these techniques, like UV, IR, NMR, and mass spectrometry techniques. Which techniques will provide you a quantitative information? I might have already discussed with you. Which one of these, all of them are qualitative information. They can give you qualitative information. But which one of these techniques, apart from qualitative information, will also provide you quantitative information? Answer karo. No answer. But you told that you have been taught UVIR. Now, all the four.
So, can I just repeat the question?
Say it.
So, can I just repeat the question?
Among these four spectral methods, UV, visible, IR, NMR, and mass, which techniques will provide, all of them provide a qualitative information, like is it present or not. But apart from qualitative information, only one of this technique provides you quantitative information, means how much amount of the compound is present there. Estimation.
It's a real-time UV.
UV, right? And what is the reason behind that? Why UV can do, others cannot do? You answer my next question, then probably you will be able to get a hint for that. All these techniques are called spectroscopic techniques, there is no issue. They can be called spectrometric technique also, there is no problem. But only one of these techniques is called spectrophotometric techniques. And that is UV. And that is the reason that you can quantification. The name itself tells. So photometric, right? What is metric? Meter means measurement. Photometric means photons. So all these techniques except mass, right? Except mass is the distinct electronic energy. All these three techniques, they use electromagnetic radiation, right? Electromagnetic radiation means you are going to use photon. So out of these three techniques, all the three techniques use electromagnetic radiation, but only first techniques, UV techniques, has a scope to measure how much amount of the energy we have given to the analyte, how much energy has come out, naturally how much energy has been consumed. So you can measure the photon. So that's called photometrics. Since the build-up of the instrument is such that only in case of UV visible techniques, you can measure what is the intensity. That's why Lambert's-Beer's law comes into the picture in case of UV visible. So how much amount of the incident radiation has done, what is the energy, and what is the radiation which has come out, and the difference in the intensity is going to be the energy which has been consumed by the samples. So naturally, it is going to be directly proportional to the amount of the sample. That's the reason you can carry out UV in a quantitative. That's the reason UV have to do a quantitative measurement. So that's the reason why UV is called a only. Nowadays, what we do, we try to convert them also some quantity, but that is not the actual quantitative estimation for that one. We can have a reference standard, calibration carbon, etc. So that is the reason UV is a approved techniques for the quantification, called pharmacopoeial approved techniques for that, because it can measure how much amount of the light has been consumed by the analyte, because the build-up of the equipment is such that you can do it. Other case, you cannot do it. There is nothing wrong otherwise for that. So that's the reason only you can do quantification, how much amount of compound is present there in the UV. Now, when we take the UV visible, we have two parameters. One is the lambda max value, which provides you a qualitative idea. Any structural change we are going to do in the molecules, it is going to have a change in the lambda max value. Accordingly, we can get a basochromic shift, we can get a hypsochromic shift, right? And other parameters, which is called molecular or molar extinction coefficient, epsilon, right? Epsilon provides you a quantitative aspect, means how much amount of the material is present there. Now, is it possible that I told you that when you change the structure, you are going to change the lambda max value? Under what condition that there may not be any change in the purity of the compound, but the epsilon value also changes. So what are the, is it possible, I mean, which structural parameters is associated with the change with the epsilon values? Or the way you have been taught, as I guess so, that lambda max value is a variable parameters, but epsilon value is not a variable parameter for a type of substances. Very rarely you will find out that epsilon changes depending upon the a minute change in the structure, but lambda max value will change drastically. Or I give you other indirect another way also. Is it possible, or all these techniques? Let me reframe in a different way. We have discussed these techniques. Out of these four techniques, which one of these techniques can be used for a quantification? Mass also can be done a quantification, although mass is 8-way approved. In case of mass, the electronics is such that we can make use of the mass spectrometry also for quantification, but you need a reference standard. For UV, you don't need any reference standard for that. But for the mass, you need a reference standard. It can be done a quantification. As a matter of fact, that PKPD determination in the drug analysis, and not only drug analysis, in the drug development, the PKPD is very much dependent upon the ESI-based mass spectrometry. So leave aside that aspect. So among these four techniques, which techniques can help you to determine a stereochemistry? UV visible, infrared, NMR, and mass, right? Which of the techniques can be used to determine the stereochemistry? NMR has been taught to you?
Yes, sir.
So is it possible to use NMR for a stereochemistry determination?
No,
Yes,
not
sir.
stereochemistry.
Yes or no? Whether we, my question was very broad. My question was that out of these four, popularly and probably other than this, we do not have as of now any spectrometric method for the structural determination. X-ray is a different one. X-ray also we can say that, but apart from X-ray, X-ray is not routinely used. So between UV visible, infrared, NMR, and mass, which one of these techniques can be used to determine stereochemistry of a organic compound? You have been told UV visible. Is it possible? You start from UV visible. Can we, yes or no? Can we use UV visible for determining the stereochemistry? It may not be all.
No, sir.
Yes or no?
No.
Fine, I'll come back. How about IR?
No, sir.
Again, I'll come back. How about NMR?
If the NMR can be done, I think.
Example?
Like in cis alkenes and trans alkenes can be differentiated.
if I ask you a question, that NMR played a very, very significant role in changing our understanding of the whole facet of the whole gamut of the stereochemistry.
Yes, sir, due to ring current, that deviation.
So that is stereochemistry, nothing to ring current. Ring current is going to be the planar
No,
molecule.
it's cis-alkene and trans-alkene, they can differentiate.
Yeah, then it is not a ring current. This is not a ring current. This is going to be, we call the shielding and deshielding effect of the p orbitals. Ring
Yes,
current
yes.
is yeah, it can determine the stereochemistry, right? Okay. And now I do not know whether which textbook you have read for the stereochemistry. Who is called the father of modern stereochemistry? Actually, he should be called.
Is this that
Pantov.
Jean-Baptiste Biot?
Actually, I told modern. Van 't Hoff, you are correct, because Van 't Hoff started, actual stereochemistry started from Van 't Hoff. Modern stereochemistry. That's the reason I used the modern. Yeah, who was talking? Arko? Other one?
Sir, it's me, Moitra.
Moitra. So tell, who is called father of modern stereochemistry?
Yes, sir, my answer was Van 't Hoff, and I think he was the first Nobel Prize winner in chemistry.
No, I'm talking modern. I know that. This was the first one, right? Van 't Hoff started. Tetrahedral nature of carbon was done by Van 't Hoff.
Yes.
I'm talking modern. That's the reason I have added the word modern stereochemistry.
Sir, then it's answer label.
No, Van 't Hoff Label, they got together. Both of them got the Nobel Prize for the tetrahedral nature of carbon. They got together. They shared the first Nobel Prize in chemistry.
Yes.
It's called Sir D.H.R. Barton, Derek Barton. Why he is called father of modern stereochemistry? Now, we know the cyclohexane, right? And Beer Sahab has told that cyclohexane is not a planar, the way write in a plane of paper, is a puckered ring system, right? So how do you establish, he established that it is a non-planar based on the mismatch of the heat of hydrogenation of a N-alkane versus a cycloalkane. And there he found out there is a minimal mismatch when you take a cyclohexane. Then per methylene group heat of hydrogenation is going to be the same if you take a N-alkane versus a cyclohexane. And then it is going to be deviation, then it becoming pure, right? And to explain that non-planar nature, then finally it came that it is a chair form in cyclohexane, right? And you know that one conversion of one chair form to another chair form is a conformational change, right? I will not teach you stereochemistry. I will only help you to appreciate and to have your own query that how much accurate your mindset should be to learn chemistry. And this mindset, this intuitiveness, you must develop right from the beginning. Then only you learn any topic. We are taking an example of chemistry or stereochemistry in this particular case, right? Now, so your question is that one, you don't have to answer me, but if you have already taught stereochemistry, should come from this answer, that we consider that a conversion of one chair form to other chair form of cyclohexane is a conformational change, right? This is one change. Then there is another change takes place, say in amine, like ammonia, right? NH3 is a pyramidal form. So there is a pyramidal inversion.
Sin anti.
Say it again.
Sin and anti.
No, I could not listen to you properly. Maybe there was a echo was taking. Repeat it again.
So is it sin anti-isomerism?
No, I'm not telling this one. What I'm telling that there is a stereochemical change. You take cyclohexane chair form has been taught to you or no? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Fine. So say chair form, what you can do, you can convert one chair form to the other chair form, means that carbon number 1 and carbon number 4 in one form, in one structure might be carbon number 4 in upward direction and carbon number 1 is a downward direction. When you convert other one, the number 1 is upward direction and number 4 is downward direction. This is called chair inversion. So the chair inversion, this is called chair inversion, conversion of one chair form to the other chair form. This is called a conformational change. And then if you take ammonia, in ammonia, nitrogen is a tripodal molecule, right? Because there is a lone pair of electron. So this is called a pyramidal molecule. So you can write the ammonia in such a way, the nitrogen is in the top, and below there are 3 hydrogen, is a tripodal hydrogen. You can write it in an invert form also, in which all the 3 hydrogen in upward direction and nitrogen is in downward direction. So when you convert this from the other one, this is called pyramidal inversion. You are inverting the pyramid. So question is like that can you prove it that chair inversion of cyclohexane is a conformational change, but pyramidal inversion of nitrogen or phosphorus, this is a configurational change, that you can prove it. Now coming back to that, that was not my question, it came. It was a very, very nice question people put on. And you can determine, you can establish that one, that why one is a conformational change and why another is a configurational change. So it is supposed to be taught to, if the statements have been taught. If it is not taught, then hopefully in the December we will meet personally, and if I am spending time with you in the laboratory, then we will have enough time to discuss the chemistry. And that's what I used to do when I was teaching in Burdwan University in the master's degree, when I used to run the practical. That is the time you get a lot of chemistry discussion over here. So we'll see that when the previous go forward. Coming back to that. So that means there is a conformation. Let's come back to a very simple thing. Ethane, right? In the ethane, there are 2 forms. One is called staggered form and another is called that eclipse form. Eclipse form means when you write down 2 ethylene molecule top to top, all the 3 hydrogens are superimposed to each other. In the other form, they are as far apart as other. So these are 2 conformational isomers. But you know that you cannot distinguish between them in the normal condition, because they are so much interconvertible, because there is a rotation along the interconnecting silicon. So then, how do you prove it? The conformational isomers are there. Until unless, otherwise it becomes like God, and nobody has seen the God for that, right? So you cannot prove that. That's the reason the other people whom we call Gnostics, so they will not believe it, that no, God doesn't exist, because you prove it, the bodies exist for that. Similarly, it is almost like that. How do you prove it? Then in fact, a molecule can be having into different form, one form and other form, they are conformer. They are same molecule but may not be the identical molecule, because there is some changes taking place in the 3-dimensional space. So this was first proof by Sir D.H.L. Barton. So you have 12 hydrogen in a cyclohexane. 2 sets of hydrogen, 6 are axial hydrogen and 6 are equatorial hydrogen. But under normal condition, now the question is coming, if you can demonstrate that a particular molecule has 2 different types of hydrogen, then your purpose will be solved. And only techniques which can differentiate between 2 sets of hydrogen is an NMR. And there we take a chemical signal. But chemically they are similar, they are chemically identical. So that's why there is a term in NMR called chemically equivalent, but magnetically non-equivalent. Although we use it very precisely for a asymmetric center containing molecule, but not you can use it also here. So only techniques which can distinguish between hydrogens in the same molecules got to be NMR. So now the question is that can we use NMR, and that's exactly was done by Sir D.H.L. Barton, and that is the reason he is called the father of modern stereochemistry. So under normal condition, if you take an NMR of cyclohexane, you will get a broad peak, and if you take a external standard, those peaks will be corresponding to integral value of 12 proton. Now if you lower the temperature, then at around minus 17 degrees centigrade, find out the single peak has a tendency to break it, and slowly you can make a completely baseline level, maybe at minus 80 degrees centigrade or minus 70 degrees centigrade. So now you are taking an NMR of the same molecule, but it is showing two signals, means there are distinctly two sets of protons. One is axial proton, another equilateral proton. Now this is your take-home exercise between axial and equilateral proton. Whose chemical shift value will be higher and whose chemical shift value will be lower. So it was done by Sir Derek Barton. That's the reason. Sir, now coming back to this, any tricky question. So what we do in the science, we have a query. Kyun hota hai, or can it happen, and etc. That question comes to our mind. Then, to have a rational answer, we have to have some experimental results, which is called data. For that, we have to devise an experiment. Then perform this experiment, collect the data, interpret the data, and that data is going to give you a proof of concept for that, right? So, any branches of science, chemistry, physics, mathematics, astronomy, whatever the science you tell it for that. So that kind of query to get a solution is going to be the spectrometric techniques. And mostly these three techniques which we use a electromagnetic radiation, UV, IR and NMR. So coming back to the conformation analysis, yes, NMR provided you that yes, conformer do exist. And another kind of conformers, but NMR will not distinguish between, say, whatever I tell you that conformation in the acyclic molecule, and that is done by the IR. So you can determine stereochemistry by IR. You can determine stereochemistry by UV for that, but only not all the type of stereochemistry, some specific situation. So this is what I wanted to see, that and there are certain things, the gaps are there, not merely for the purpose of identification of the functional group. When we go to the qualitative organic functional group analysis, any qualitative thing will be very easy to do. Means it should be as much as possible. Can you demonstrate, and they are all called by visual change. Visual change can be evolution of the gas. Visual change can be change in the color, and visual change can be also a like gaseous substrate or similarly a solid precipitate for that. So these are the three major things. So moment you can perform your experiment in such a way, either you can demonstrate evolution of the gas. Only problem is that when evolution of the gas, it will be very difficult for you to determine which gas it is. Then we have a little bit limitation in this regard. Similarly, if it is a merely precipitate, like mostly we take a white precipitate or maybe cardio white precipitate. So only precipitate doesn't tell you what it is for that. Color becomes much easier for you. So color test is one of the important concept of the invisible of the qualitative analysis, and the color concept also comes from the ultraviolet spectroscopy, and for that you have to learn all those things. What we'll do for that? Before we proceed further, I'll quickly go through and I'll touch upon all those issues of the UV and IR, NMR and mass. I'll take on the separate day. Today it will not be possible for us to discuss. And since partly this is part of our this one also, like our syllabus, what we are going to put that, like fundamental preliminary understanding on the IR and preliminary understanding on the UV is not UV, little bit is the UV will be required during our understanding in the qualitative analysis. So let me share to you that I'll go quickly and demonstrate to you that how you can use other techniques in a much simplified way. Now we will be coming across just sharing I have done it. Chloroform, bromoform, and iodoform. Before I go for that, say that in qualitative analysis, as I told you, that we have some inspection of the molecule which is called ion sharing, right? You let me know when. Let me know whether you are being able to see the slide or not. Is it visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, fine. I have now taken to the other one. Now, before I start the discussion, I hopefully you have been. I do not know whether class 2 you have a practical or not organic chemistry. We didn't have but ours was a old higher secondary system. Like in generally, what you do whenever you get a compound, we'll show that one. You do some inspection, visual inspection, not like what is the color. Number one, whether solid or liquid or not. As I told you, the solid liquid also give some inference regarding class of the compound. Then, how does it color looks like? So, whenever there is a color compound, generally it will be either tint yellow or distinct yellow or distinctly colored compound. Then we come to a conference. So, what is it? We call test. Test is that here we are not doing the observation. Observation is the compound is light yellow color or a dark yellow color. Then we draw an inference. Sulfur and nitrogen may be present. Right? So, what is the fundamental basis behind this inference? That moment a compound is color in nature, then we tell that it might contain a sulfur or it might contain a nitrogen. What is the fundamental basis behind that? Why sulfur compound should be color? Why not oxygen compound similar should not be color?
So it's because the valence electrons in sulfur require less energy to get effect.
No, why?
Larger wavelength.
Why it requires less energy? So which transition it takes less normally when you are taking the color in general sulfur compound? It's an n-pi star transition, right? N orbital in sulfur is a higher energy. Ground state energy of n orbital of sulfur is higher. You see that? You go for the SPDF, let's say, find out is a higher energy. That's why the gap between n and pi star become lesser in case of sulfur. Now, the similar thing, if you take chloroform, but when you go to nitrogen, nitrogen is generally associated with amine, then n-pi star transition, or generally nitro compound, then you have a distinctive pharmacophore. So that's why nitrogen is, I'm not giving much interest in. Why we draw a conclusion, even inorganic analysis also, sulfide might be present. If the compound is yellow in color, the sulfide might be present. And then you go to the sulfide radical analysis for that. Why? Now, this is the thing, the sulfur, they undergo, and that is the reason that elemental sulfur is a yellow in color, because here the sulfur bonds are there. So it is actually n-pi star transition takes place, and the lone pair of electron of sulfur is in higher energy than the oxygen atom. So that's why the gap between n and pi star is significantly low in such a way that we can get a close to visible light. So yellow is not that much visible range, is a borderline range. Similar we get in organic compounds, similar kind of situation. Chloroform, bromoform and iodoform. Apart from iodoform being a solid, iodoform has a distinctly yellow color. Chloroform is, both chloroform and bromoform is a colorless liquid, only bromoform density is more than the chloroform. Another question is that why iodoform show yellow color and chloroform, bromoform does not show the color? I will not go that much details for that, right? Same thing, n orbital, it is n-pi star transition. In chloroform, bromoform and iodoform, only functional group you have a carbon-halogen bond. There is no pi orbital. Sigma star transition is a very high energy transition. It will come as a much lesser lambda max value. That means cutoff value is going to, cutoff value is called, the solvent absorption values are called cutoff values. Means if your absorption is coming in the same range where solvent molecule is absorbing, then you cannot use it for that. That's called cutoff value. As a matter of fact, that sigma star transition becomes less than 150 or 160, and without vacuum you cannot do it. So that's why we do not consider sigma star. So there is no pi orbital over there. So naturally it cannot be pi star transition. It is going to be n pi star transition. And the same logic, the n electron of chlorine versus bromine versus iodine, the iodine n electrons are in a higher energy level. So that's why gap between n and pi star decreases, and you can get a transition for them. Now, if we take this slide, this is taken from the Pavia's book. If you read the Pavia's book, simply I have taken the Pavia's book, a very nice book to learn all the techniques for it, etc. So you take a electromagnetic radiation. This slide shows you that what exactly happens in the analyte when it is exposed to an electromagnetic radiation, and accordingly it gives us a various kind of spectrometric techniques. Like the lowest energy of the electromagnetic radiation, it induces a change in the spin. If the spin is the NMR, nucleus, it's for nuclear NMR spectroscopy. If it's an electron, for electron spin resonance spectroscopy. For routine organic chemical analysis is not used, but whenever you research material science, you find that ESR become very important and tool. And for the biomedical research, ESR become very handy tool. For the chemistry only, whenever we have an anticipation that my organic reaction is going through the free radical, then we take an ESR to prove it. Otherwise, for the routine organic chemical analysis, it is N1. Then microwave, not used routinely for the chemist, but it is used for the physicist for getting a in-depth analysis for that. So this tells you that molecular level changes take place inside the analyte molecules when it interacts with further. So this is the change of spin. This is the change of orientation, right? East, west, north, south, orientation and changes of the molecules. When it absorbs energy in the infrared radiation, this change is technically called change of configuration. The moment you are making change of configuration, configuration is a stereochemical terminology. That means there is an inherent possibility for this molecule, for these techniques to use for the determination of the stereochemistry, right? Now, why it is called change of configuration? Now, when infrared portion of the electromagnetic radiation is absorbed, it undergoes called vibrational changes, stretching vibration and bending vibration. Stretching vibration is associated with the temporarily increase or decrease of the bond length, right? So now, they are called descriptor. Descriptor is a very common terminology used for the drug design. Descriptor is nothing but description of the molecule. Although in the chemistry, we do not use the word descriptor. Descriptor means the terminology or the parameters which describe something. That is called descriptor. Very properly technical terminology. So now we have to describe a stereochemistry of a molecule, right? We have to describe oxygen molecule versus hydrogen chloride molecule. Apart from chemical constituents, if you have to describe this molecule, then the descriptor will use it the bond length. Hydrogen fluorine bond length versus oxygen, or maybe OH bond length for that, right? Or maybe HX hydrogen chloride versus hydrogen bromide. So that gives you a description in stereochemistry. But we know that this is a one-dimensional molecule, so naturally it doesn't have a 3D stereochemistry. So now if we go a triatomic molecule like water molecule, right? It will give basically give two type of descriptor, right? Now descriptor is going to be total number of the description is called actual descriptor. Two type of descriptor. One is that OH bond length. There are two OH bond length, and there is a bond angle also. So H-OH bond angle 105 degree, right? So you have to define both of them. Otherwise, you are not going to describe the stereochemistry. So now, what happens when the molecule is undergoing a absorption in the infrared event? Either it is undergoing change in the bond length or the bond angle. So either bond length or bond angle, those are the descriptor to define stereochemistry, means configuration of the molecule. So that's the reason it's a configurational change. So it tells you very easily that means we can use the IR to determine the stereochemistry of that. Same thing is possible for the UV, then it comes visible range. So when it is in the valence shell electron release will take place, it is called ultraviolet spectroscopy. So, but it is distinguished from photochemistry. In the photochemistry also we use electromagnetic radiation. But Lambert's-Beer's law gives the boundary of the UV spectroscopy. Boundary is like that during the exposure of the analyte to the electromagnetic radiation, it should not undergo any bond cleavage. If bond cleavage takes no dissociation, dissociation means bond cleavage for that. Like ionization is also another kind of dissociation. Because then your quantification will be erroneous, because number of molecules absorbing is very different. So that is the boundary condition. So that actually distinguishes between a organic photochemistry versus organic invisible spectroscopy. So if the energy is so high that it induces a bond breaking, then it becomes a photochemistry. That means it is now not going to obey the Lambert's-Beer's law. So when this transition takes place within the valence shell, so that you are not breaking any bond, so then it becomes a invisible spectroscopy. So now here, inherently we cannot come to a decision. Like here, looking at the change in the molecular changes takes place, we can very well correlate these techniques with the stereochemistry. It's a very, very rudimentary way, but I'll give you an example. Then moment you may be much stronger, then it is going to be inner core electron, then later on it will be so much high that it is going to eject one of the particles, then it becomes radioactivity. So that is the reason up to here we have the common techniques we call electronic spectra, what we call electronic spectra, change of the electronic distribution, but that is not correct terminology. Here also we'll find out is the electronic energy level takes place, but traditionally we call electronic spectra is called invisible spectroscopy. But in case of IR also the electronic changes takes place. The change takes place in the electronic redistribution, only the vibrational level change. That's why it's called vibrational spectrum. And these are three common techniques, right? So this you know. Let me go straight forward where you will see that all these things will correlate you. Like in case of UV, we take a lambda value, which is going to be a qualitative parameter. Any structural changes takes place, we try to do Y basochromic shape, Y isochromic shape. And in case of IR, we take the wave number, qualitative values. Molar absorptivity, epsilon value or molar extinction coefficient is only taken in case of UV spectroscopy, and that is correlated with the quantitative presence of the analytes. That's why only UV can provide you the quantitative percent. And then you have understood all those things, right? So this is, I don't need to enter thing. Let me go to the crunch of this thing, right? Another thing, I do not know whether you have critically analyzed this thing or not. When you take a ketone carbonyl, right? It is an sp2 hybridized carbon, and oxygen has 2 lone pair of electron, right? So whether 2 lone pair of electron on oxygens are equivalent or not in the carbonyl group. I will not elaborate or not, so this it has been clearly mentioned over here. So that when you take a carbonyl group, then carbonyl carbon will be sp2 hybridized. But oxygen need not be sp2 hybridized. If oxygen becomes sp2 hybridized, then these 2 lone pair of electrons are going to be equivalent. But this is not sp2 hybridized, this is sp hybridized. And this very tricky answer only comes from the UV spectroscopy, because these 2 lone pair of electrons are on 2 different energy levels. So again, spectroscopic techniques provides you a very critical answer, right? We will come back to that how we can use UV spectroscopy. Let me come back. Wherever it is important for you to know, I'll elaborate on that. Yeah, I think you should be able to do that. You have come across Woodward-Fieser rule while you have taught UV spectroscopy? Yes or no? Dyne versus heterogonal versus homogonal dyne? Is it taught to you?
No, sir.
Oh, no. So then what have been taught to EV? Right, I will not teach you, right? That means your UV has not been, probably another will be that. Like now I'll tell you. Answer will be over here. So I'll only first highlight it. So what has been done? So these are already initially done by statistical analysis by Woodward and Pfizer. At the time, proton NMR was not there. Forget about carbon-13. X-ray crystal structure was not there. So these two gentlemen, they did human service to the organic chemistry. Now, had it been the case that Woodward and Pfizer, like chemistry, were not there, I do not know whether organic chemistry would become the way the organic chemistry study or not. So, I mean, this unparalleled service to the organic chemistry understanding. So they initially did large number of compounds, steroids and terpenoids were the major molecule organic people are doing for that. So most of them having a dying system at least. So they did a statistical analysis, and out of which they made a table which will provide data on people that how we can determine a structure of a compound if it is a new compound by looking at that. So this is called empirical rule. So what they do that in case if a molecule has a diene which is in a heteroannular fashion, then it should be minimum 214 nanometer. X will be lambda max value. If it is a homoannular, it will be 253. I have not gone through your total course content. I'll try to find out. Maybe it is supposed to be taught. If it is not taught, it has to be taught to you at some level of your BSMS. You cannot get the MS degree without this understanding, right? I'll come back to that. This is called homoannular diene and heteroannular. This is called homoannular diene means when two double bonds are in the same ring, called homoannular. When they are distributed in a different ring, they are called heteroannular. This is an heteroannular diene. Now, coming back to that, why it is so? Now, this is homoannular diene and this is heteroannular diene. Now, lambda max value is always higher in the homoannular diene. I will not go the details why it is so, right? 273 and 234. Now, I have a question. Are they stereoisomer? Yes or no? Homoannular and heteroannular? They are two different compounds, right? These two compounds are two different compounds. They are isomer because they are same molecular weight. Their connectivity is the same thing. All CC bond connectivity is the same thing. Only difference is that in three-dimensional space, their double bond orientation, they are stereoisomer. They are called dia-stereoisomer. And look at lambda max value, we know, always there is a change in the lambda max value for that. But look at the epsilon value. This is 5,000 to 15,000 means varies, not the molecule. And it is 12,000 to 28,000. Now, this epsilon value provides you purity of the molecules. If there is a large variation, it will give you confusion that are we dealing with the pure molecules or not. So, stereochemistry changes for that, and UV can determine. That means you can use the UVs to determine the stereochemistry. I will go directly to that stereochemistry. These empirical rules, right, what they did, and they matches very well. So I will not go for that, but I will show one thing, that what was empirical earlier, today we cannot tell probably empirical. We can have a very good correlation by the slide. And that's why I told you that how much credibility they had. They didn't have a X-ray crystal structure, etc. But most of the structures which were determined by Woodward during the time where X-ray crystal structure was there, as far as I understand, none of these structures later on has been challenged once all those techniques were there. So, what is the strength of these Woodward Pfizer rules? So, in probably 1930s or so, or maybe 1920s, this natural product was isolated. This was called alpha cyperone by the inventor. And what they did all the element analysis and all the way, whatever I showed you. So in the absence of NMR, X-ray crystal structure was not there. So they published the compound in Journal of American Chemical Society and published the structure like this, right? So this was the data, only data available at the time. Probably IR also was there, but I have only focused on the EV. That EV data was observed data to 51 nanometer, and log epsilon tells you that this is actually bypass attention has to be very high intensity. The paper was published. And once the paper was published, Woodward has gone through the paper and he felt uncomfortable. By this time, Woodward-Pfizer rule is in the domain and people are routinely using Woodward compound. So he found out that this structure does not matches with the observed lambda max value. If the observed lambda max value varies more than 5 nanometers, that means something else is missing. Either you have not calculated properly, or some parameters you have not done, or it is a different compound. So he didn't challenge the general his authenticity of the compound, only for that probably that there is something is missing. So he did that no. If we have to believe the UV data, and which I am not disbelieving, and all the carbon hydrogen analysis, everything remains the same thing, then this cannot be the structure because it's calculated value based on the Woodward-Pfizer rule or Woodward-Nelson-Pfizer rule for Inon system. It is not matching, it is deviating more than plus minus 5. Better suited structure will be this one. So he proposed this one. And after 10 years, probably 1940s, when X-ray crystal structure started to become popular and X-ray crystal structure was known and later on found out, whatever the structure was predicted by Woodward by simply taking a piece of paper and found to be the correct structure. So that is the strength, that is the reason, although those are called empirical, but actually those are not empirical because all these things have a fundamental value for that list. Okay, so our query was there, can we use UV for determination of stereochemistry? We talk about hydrogen bond, and hydrogen bond formation is the heart of the you call chemical biologist or call what we call that biophysicist or drug development people. And how do we estimate the hydrogen bond strength? UV can provide you hydrogen bond strength. All your physical parameters, like your dielectric constant, polarity, etc., UV used for that. So I'll come to hydrogen bond when I come any necessity for that. Let me first show you. You can use UV to determine the stereochemistry. Now, these are enone, right? 5 members and 6 members. Only thing is that this enone is not entire thing is not in the cyclic molecule, part of the cyclic molecule. These are called cycloalkene derivative, acetyl cyclohexene, cyclopentene, or acetyl cyclohexene. So if we consider the substitution pattern, then this is alpha, this is beta. So on that basis, you can calculate it, and based on the this Woodward-Pfizer or Nelson-Pfizer rule, you can calculate the value of this molecule is supposed to be 235, and observed value 239. And this was the measured epsilon value. Normally, all bypass statins have at least to the tune of 10,000 is going to be the epsilon value. So that's why log epsilon become 4 or at least above 300, etc. Same thing here also. I will not go by this mismatch in the calculated and observed value. So you compare entry 1 and entry 3. Entry 1 is acetyl cyclopentene. This is cyclopentene. This is an acetyl group. And this can be called 1-acetyl 2-methyl cyclopentene. That means in the 2 position, there is a methyl group. So when you introduce a methyl group, it is going to change the lambda max value, and the lambda max value has been changed from 239. You are supposed to have a basochromic shift to 53, right? Because you have a alkyl group substitution, a beta position, you are adding for that. But there is a decrease in the epsilon value, 13,000 to 10,000. So the moment there is a change in the epsilon values, so far we know, it depends upon the type of transition probability. And transition probability is depending upon whether it is a bypass transition or whether it is an n-pass transition. N-pass transition is a weak intensity transition because transition probability is very low. It is a called symmetry forbidden transition, right? So this will tell you that probably the compound is not pure, because why there should be so much less epsilon value. And it becomes even much prominent when you are taking the 6-member analog, when a methyl group is added there, from 13,000 become almost half. So that means it will tell you that probably it is a 50% molecule. So this is an example of the stereochemistry. If you take a molecule of this structure, R is a general structure, R might be hydrogen when it's called 1-acetyl cyclohexene, and when R equal to methyl group, 2-methyl. So when there is a non-hydrogen atom over there, there is going to be a steric interaction in the planar molecule R between methyl, and to avoid this steric interaction, there is supposed to be rotation along this single bond. So this is going to be that. Now these are called stereoisomers. They are non-mirror image, they are non-superimposable. These are dia-stereoisomer. You can call conformational isomer also. So conformational isomer can be dia-stereoisomer also. So that is conformation is a very tricky terminology. And these are defined as a stereochemical nomenclature. S trans and SC you might be knowing, but in case I do not know whether S stands for interconnecting single bond. When there are two pi frame work are interconnected through a single bond, and with reference to this interconnecting single bond, the pi bonds are, it may be C double bond C, it may be a combination of C double bond O and C double bond C. When they are in the same side, these are called S-Cs. Their S is coming with reference to the single bond, interconnecting single bond, or S trans. Now, this interconversion will depend upon how much interaction it is taking place between R and methyl group. And epsilon value depends upon the transition probability primarily. That's why n-pi star transition is a very weak intensity transition. We rarely use for the routine chemical analysis n-pi star transition. It is only pi star transition we take, whether enone or diene system. And it depends upon the, and that's the reason is since it is values to the tune of 10,000, so plus minus 5, plus minus 10, even plus minus 100 also does not matter. So that is the reason when there is a simple structural change in the molecule, we do not bother about a minor deviation in the epsilon value. We only concentrate on the lambda max value. But when the changes is more than 1,000, then you cannot avoid it. So other parameter which is responsible to give the epsilon value is A. A is called effective area of the chromophore, or it can be called effective length of the chromophore. That means it is, if we for a particular transition in pi star transition, if P become a constant, then epsilon become directly proportional to the A. Means epsilon is going to be proportional to the L squared. A very small deviation in the length of the chromophore is going to be a large deviation. Now, you compare the length value of the S trans versus length of the SCs. In case of S trans, is a higher, in case of SCs is a lower. So if the molecule is an S transform, its epsilon value is going to be much, much more. So now there will be an unequal distribution of the molecule. It will depend upon how much steric factor is taking place. So that means whether the molecule is an S transform or S-cis form, looking at the epsilon value we can determine. So you can use EV spectroscopy for determining the stereochemistry, but not all type of stereochemistry. Like this can be done only by the EV spectroscopy, right? Now I go for another example for the EV spectroscopy. We'll take the color one. So I'm not discussing lambda max value. I hopefully lambda max are done, but I'll ask the question when it comes to the chemical analysis, that why this molecule is taken. Let me directly go to the stereochemistry for that. Very routinely we do halogenation reaction in a in a ketone, alpha position. If you are doing a halogenation reaction in a cyclic ketone, like cyclohexanone, when you do like bromination reaction, chlorination reaction, you need a chlorine gas. Chlorine gas is very difficult to handle. Iodine is a photosensitive, that's why very easy to carry out bromination reaction available. When in today's context, bromine is a very, very corrosive agent, but chlorine is much, much worse because it's a gaseous molecule, and if you can inhale chlorine, then you will vomit. So that is a problem. Iodine is innocent, but only problem is that very photosensitive. So it will be very difficult for you to preserve the iodo compounds. So that's why bromination reaction. So for the time being, we do not concern about the green chemistry aspect and etc. The moment we are doing bromination reaction, very easy to carry out. In presence of sodium carbonate as a base or maybe triethylamine as a base, you can do the bromination reaction. But moment you are doing a bromination reaction, bromine can be axial bromine and bromine can be equatorial bromine. You can determine by extra crystal structure, but you can simply do UV and determine the axial. And routinely, whatever we do not use, very rarely we use an n-pi star transition, but you can now use an n-pi star transition. And looking at the n-pi star transition, you can tell whether the halogen is an axial position or equatorial position. In general, the axially halogenated cycloalkanones have a bathochromic shift to the tune of minimum 10 to 12 nanometer. It becomes 20 nanometer if it becomes bromine, 30 nanometer at least if it becomes iodine. So generally chlorine and bromine K. So the halogenated axial compound undergoes a bathochromic shift for the n-pi star transition than the equatorial compound, and that can be explained. The moment is the n-pi star transition, there are two reasons. Number, due to some reason, n orbital of the oxygen atom in the axially disposed halogen is in a higher energy state than the equatorial. And this can be done by doing this kind of interaction. This is called no bond resonance. So this is a resonance structure. So you know what is called no bond resonance or hyperconjugation? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. So hyperconjugation we only know to determine the relative stability of the olefin, alkene, and etc. Right. But hyperconjugation no bond resonance. This is also another kind of no bond resonance. It's not very popular example. So moment is an axially position, then it can undergo a resonance structure. So this is a temporary breaking of this X plus molecule. So since in this form, there is a no bond between X and this, that's why this is a no bond resonance, right? In doing that, what is happening? That you are increasing the electron density of the oxygen. So increasing the electron density means you are increasing the intrinsic energy level of the n orbital. The same thing does not happen in the equatorial position. Why? Now, to have this no bond resonance is nothing but the orbital overlap. So if you consider the pi star orbital, the pi star orbital and the sigma star orbital in such a way that, or maybe a sigma antibonding orbital and pi bonding orbital, they can very easily overlap. And due to this overlapping, this conjugation has become possible. It is only possible if it is in an axial position. When this is an equatorial position, then they are orthogonal because pi is perpendicular and this is going to be the sigma star antibonding orbital. We'll discuss that one, you know all those things. But this sigma star antibonding orbital orientation will be required when we understand the mode of bonding, when we understand the mechanism of the SN2 reaction. So this orbital overlap does not become possible in case of equatorial. So simply looking at the UV lambda max value, compare these two compounds. So you don't have the exact value. So you know you have separated this compound, and if it's a bromo compound, they can be diastereoisomer, so their melting point varies. If it's a bicyclic compound, it will be sorted molecule. I have not checked that one. Cyclohexanone will give a solid or not. But if it's a bicyclic ketone, it will give a solid compound. You separate them, you know there are two different compounds. You do not have to do a routine analysis for that. Only you take their UV value. Higher one is going to be axially disposed and lower one is going to be transition. Same way, IR can be used. So when we go to the carbonyl compound, we will take a few examples of them. So you can use the most prominent example of the stereochemical implication for UV spectra is this one. There is some band in the UV called S-cis band. Was it taught to you? S-cis band was told to you, yes or no?
Sir, we have not heard the term.
All right, fine. So why it is called S-cis band? You come to simple diene. Butadiene can be in this form or in this form. We discuss about this is going to be heteroannular form, but it is not in annular, so we are not going to use the heteroannular. So this is going to be S trans conformation. This is conformation. Why? Now because it can be very easily converted for that. If we cannot convert it, it can be configuration also. But mostly these are diastereoisomers. So S trans form and S cis form. In the butadiene, you have a 2 pi bonding orbital and 2 pi antibonding orbital. And pi star transition is a highly permissible transition, but not all of them. So ideally,
then if they are not interconvertible, then they are configurations, and if they are
exactly configuration will be. I think I showed you that a car like that to convert one form to the other form. you have to achieve the activation energy. This is called rotational barrier. So if this rotational barrier can be achieved under normal conditions, that means you can very easily convert it. So those are called conformational isomers. You can have, and structurally they look like a conformational isomer, but the rotational energy barrier is such that you cannot convert one form to the other form. Then those are isolable. And then you can assign the configuration. A perfect example is going to the bi-array. We can assign an RNS configuration, means those are configuration isomers. But if you want to correlate them, that how one can be correlated such the other is as if we have rotation, but you cannot rotate it. That's why atrop isomer comes. Atrop isomers are actually perfect example of conformational isomers with a high energy. Energy is so high that you cannot convert one form to the other form. Right. So now, theoretically, there are two transitions possible. Only thing is that one lambda max value will be higher and another will be lower, depending upon the gap between pi and pi star. But as has been mentioned there, that this is supposed to be 230 nanometer and has been called allowed. This is called 175 nanometer. If you consider the energy gap will tell you a lambda max value of 175 nanometer. But as I mentioned there, forbidden. Why forbidden? Now, if you go to the in-depth of your fundamental of the spectroscopy, which is taught in the physical chemistry component, that the orbital symmetry decide that quantum mechanically that which transition is visible. Like n pi star transition is symmetry forbidden transition. Symmetry property of the n and pi star orbital, they do not match. This all you will learn in the photochemistry also, but that is beyond my discussion. So we will only take that one. This symmetry property of this pi 2 and pi 4 is mismatching, and symmetry does not permit them to energy exchange to take place. That's why it's called forbidden transition. That's the reason when the molecule is in S transform, then you do not see this transition because it is intensity is so low, the transition probability is very low. Maybe it does not take place. But moment the molecule convert into the S-cis form, then two things takes place. Like the way that homoannular diene has a higher lambda max value than the heteroannular, here also similar kind of orientation. The lambda max value of the earlier prominent transition from 230 nanometer, it becomes 271, but we are not discussing UV at length, so you will learn that why it is so. Now important is that whatever was not visible in this structure, you get visible in this structure. So you are getting extra band due to this stereochemical change. Since the molecule is in S-cis form, this band is called S-cis band in the UV spectroscopy. And why it is called S-cis band? It is not merely thermally, it has a very good implication in determining the structure and stereochemistry of the molecule. Now later it was found out that it was, now we have to correlate the symmetry with the molecule with the allowedness or forbidden nature of this bond. Up to 5 o'clock I have that, but maybe after that it will be automatically disconnected. Let me continue till the time we can use the time period. So this molecule has a center of symmetry, and this molecule does not have a center of symmetry. So when a molecule becomes centrosymmetric molecule, then this transition becomes forbidden transition. So all you have to do whether the molecule is a centrosymmetric or not. So now, similarly, you can find out that if you take, this is not a Stilbene. Stilbene has only one double bond in between, it is one bond X. So in this molecule is a perfectly centrosymmetric molecule, and the completely bold line is the major one band. So you are not getting the other band. So now what it has done, one double bond has become cis. This is called cis and trans. One is a cis, this is a trans double bond. And you see that there is a tendency to have the higher and lower lambda max value. The moment you get cis form, it is not a centrosymmetric molecule. The center of symmetry has been destroyed. And see that this band is coming. So this is called S-cis band. Why it is coming? Now you have developed such a S-cis conformation that you are destroying the centrosymmetric nature, and the transition which was not permissible over here, now the symmetry property permit, so you are getting an extra band. And that's the reason this is called S-cis band. And it becomes a very useful technique to determine the stereochemistry of a molecule. You know that This is called beta carotene, right? Beta carotene is a biomolecules. Carotenoid, similarly lycopodene also. For the only lycopodene, this is a open chain molecule. So in the beta carotenoids, our retinoids, they actually have this polyene system for that. That is the reason if you take carrots and even tomatoes also, even your kaddu means kumra, what is called. This also has the green portion for that, red portion. These pigments are very good for your eyes. You should eat it, all those vegetables. So when it is an all trans form, then only it will have a intense carrot color. The carrot has a deep red also, carrot yellow also. Yellow carrot is not good because it means it doesn't have an all trans double bond. So what happens when there is a temporary visual impairment takes place? So sometimes mutation takes place that due to some reason, some of the retinoid double bond, they become mutated and maybe become a cis1, etc. So in that case, artificial retinoids has been given, but this has to be completely all trans bonds. How to determine that? Not only you can determine whether all trans is there, you can determine the position also. Like when you take beta carotene, is a all trans, is a completely flat line over here. This is a perfectly centrosymmetric molecule. Now here in this double bond, this is called 9 double bond, that becomes a cis. So there is a tendency to have this harm. This is called, so depending upon the position and intensity, you can determine its position also. When you go to the 15 cis position, is a completely non-centrosymmetric molecule, so you can get this bond. So depending upon the UV, you can determine the stereochemistry also. So, and IR will provide you, like NMR has provided you a conformation analysis and cyclic system. Acyclic system conformation thing has determined the IR. When we will come to discussion portion that we'll do that. So what we'll do in the next class discussion, I'll have only one only, and I'll be off for a few days. During that time, Dr. Tapan will take the classes for that. I'll tell you when. So maybe I'll get one Monday only. The next Monday, I'll start discussing the functional group analysis. But there we'll find out that particularly in the some of the test procedure, our fundamental knowledge of the UV spectroscopy with reference to lambda max will become much important for that. And a few examples I'll take that how this can be replaced or maybe complemented by the spectrometric techniques without going in-depth detail, essential fundamental aspect which has been told. So whatever we are going to discuss in this laboratory class also, if that particular discussion become part of our essential discussion in the theory, that particular portion will be your assessment in the theory. So I stop it over here. So tomorrow we are going to have at 10:30, I'll fix the time, and with that tomorrow we are going to have our routine theory classes as per our schedule. Right, so I am stopping sharing now.